A very good evening, dear students of class 12th. So, children, we are going to start today with your first story, and the title of the story is The Last Lesson. So, remember, only the title is the last lesson, but this is the first lesson of your book, right? So, children, the last lesson is a story written by Alphonse Daudet, a very famous French novelist and a short story writer. Right? So, this is a short story written by Alphonse Daudet. So, his tenure was the tenure means the timings of his life. It was from 1840 to 1897. Right? So, children, what is depicted in the lesson basically has been given a beginning in the introductory paragraph. You know, the last lesson, the story is set in the days of a Franco-Prussian War. A war was held between two countries, France and Prussia, right? So, this war happened in which year? In the year 1870-71. And France was defeated by Prussia in this war. Prussia won this war, right? Prussians were victorious in this war. So, Prussia at that time begin to have control on the nations like Germany, Poland, and certain parts of Austria. Along with these, Prussian people also occupied two districts of France that were Alsace and Lorraine. Right? So, these two districts of France were taken by, or you may say occupied by, Prussian people after Prussians became victorious in the war. Right? So, what is depicted in the story by Alphonse Daudet, that he has tried to make a clear impression of the fact that what impact can a war have on the lives of people, like how badly or how a war can impact the lives of people in the worst manner, right? The second theme touched by Alphonse Daudet in this story is that, he has tried to express the importance of one's own language. You may say simply that he has actually put a question mark on the individual, linguistic identity of the people of a place. You know, we all are very much attached to our mother tongue. Say, most of us are Punjabis, right? So, we come from Punjabi families. So, we are so much attached to this language. If people, keep asking us, speak in English, and whenever we go to various organizations. So, whatever be the situation, we always love to speak in Punjabi, right? So, see, this lesson is about the feelings of those people whose districts have been included in some other country's territory. You know, when the war was won by Prussia, France was automatically defeated, right? So, two districts of France, that is Alsace and Lorraine, were passed into the Prussian territory. Because Prussian rule was there over those two districts, Alsace and Lorraine, the common people, everybody living in those two districts had to obey Prussian laws by default, right? Because their territory, their place was included in Prussian territory, right? So that's why the people had come under the rule of Prussians, right? So, some of the changes which automatically come with the change of the atmosphere, with the change of rule. So, those are the things depicted by Alphonse Daudet in this story, right? So, he has tried to give an insight into the historic and political atmosphere of the time. In addition to that, he has tried to take up the linguistic aspect of the people living on a particular place, right? So he's beginning the story from the point of view of a boy. The name of the boy is Franz, 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 right? So Franz is telling his story. He is narrating the story from the point of view of a schoolboy, right? He's a school going boy, and all the school going children can well understand the feelings of Franz. Whatever I would narrate, listen to it very carefully, right? So I must say that this may be a bit difficult story for you. So listen to the content very, very carefully. So children, see, from the text, from the very beginning, we see, I started for school very late that morning and was in great dread of her scolding, especially because M. Hamill had said, M. Hamill is the name of the teacher, right? Had said that he would question us on participles, and I didn't know the first word about them. You know, what was the scenario? Like the boy Franz, he was already late for his school one day, and he was very much afraid of his master's scolding. Master's name is M. Hamill, right? So he may be a very strict teacher. So Franz was much afraid of his scolding, of his reprimanding, right? So rebuking, you may say, scolding, reprimanding, or rebuking. So he was very much afraid, and he was thinking that he may have a hard time, he may have a bad time at school that day, right? So he was having a kind of fear in his mind, right? So he was also expecting that a test was to be taken on the topic participles, like present participle, past participle, we often do in English grammar, right? So he was expecting a test on participles, and he didn't know anything about that topic. We often say, I don't even know the ABC of mathematics, right? So ABC or the basics means when you don't even know a single line about something, some topic, right? So he didn't know anything about that topic. He was null in that, you may say, right? For a moment I thought of running. So what he has expressed that, for a minute, he thought that he should run away from, like he should bunk the school and spend that day out of doors. It means he was not even in the position of going back to home, as his parents would come to know that he has bunked his school, and he was not even having that courage to go to the school and face Mr. M. Hamill, right? Because he has to take a test that day. So, so it was a warm day, so bright, clear day, nice weather was there, the birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and in the open field back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. You know, Prussian soldiers, as I told you, the regions of Alsace and Lorraine were taken into Prussian territory, right? So what is sawmill? Sawmill, a machine that is used for cutting wood, right? So in the open field back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling, doing their drill work. So it was all much more tempting than the rules for participles, but I had the strength to resist and hurried off to school. You know, being naughty children, it often comes to the student's mind that they may bunk their school someday, they may take an off someday, but they are not even in the position to stay at home because of the fear in their minds, fear of their parents, and they are not even that much courageous to bunk the school, right? But yes, they really want to take a day off. Same is the condition with Franz, right? So Franz was thinking to bunk the school that day, but he was also thinking that the weather is so fine, and such a beautiful description of nature has been given, that the birds were chirping and Prussian soldiers were doing their drill work, and it was very much tempting. Tempting here means it was very much attractive as compared to the rules of participles. It means that student Fran's attention was not towards learning the rules of participles. In fact, he wanted to enjoy nature. But somehow he snubbed the idea. As he said, I had strength to resist. Right? Resisting means to stop oneself from doing something. So he gathered the strength to stop himself from bunking the school, and hurriedly he started to his way to school. Right? So when I passed the town hall, there was a crowd in the front of bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. The lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. And I thought to myself, without stopping, what can be the matter now? So now he has come to the point. He says that like he was passing from that town hall place, and many people had gathered in front of that bulletin board, a kind of notice board, where like one can see the updates, the news, whatever has recently happened, right? And from the last 2 years, all that had come from that bulletin board was bad news, right? The news about the lost battles, right? The draft, the orders of commanding officer that you would have to stay here, you would have to do that, means suppressing orders. Unhappy things had come from that board from the past 2 years. And he stopped. Franz stopped there for a while, for a minute he stopped there, and thought that now what new has come to them now, like what can be the matter now, means like what bad thing is coming to us now. He began to think, right? So what happened next was, then I hurried by as fast as I could go. The blacksmith watcher, who was there with his apprentice reading the bulletin, called after me, "Don't go so fast, Bub. You'll get to your school in plenty of time." Bub here means boy, right? So as he was hurriedly going from that place, right? So because he was applying his much of the energy in going fast, as I told you in the beginning that he got late for the school, right? So the blacksmith watcher, right? So blacksmith, the one who makes iron tools, right? The blacksmith of that place, a watcher his name, and with his apprentice. Children, apprentice means servant to a tradesperson, a kind of assistant, right? The one who gets training as well, the one who serves as well. So with his apprentice, like they were reading the bulletin board, they were reading the news, and he called Franz and asked him that he should not go so fast, and because he have plenty of time to go to school, it means he is asking him to go slow by that place. So what did he do? I thought he was making fun of me, and reached M. Hammel's little garden all out of breath. All out of breath here signifies that he was very much afraid, right? So he couldn't breathe properly, and like as he was doing hurry, he was walking fast, and the thought come to his mind that people are making fun of him by saying that like you should not go fast, and so on and so forth. Right. Next paragraph he says, usually when school began, there was a great bustle. Bustle, you may say disturbance, commotion, right? A great bustle which could be heard out in the street. The opening and closing of desks, lesson repeated in unison. Unison means suppose many of the children are like reciting something, many of the children are like speaking something together, as tables are mathematics tables are being recited, being spoken by the children, right? So something spoken together, right? So it is written here that the opening, closing, lessons, repetition of lessons, like loud voices is like you may say essential part of every school's routine. Very loud, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. But now it was all so still. It means the voice of teacher's ruler beating the desk, beating on the students' chairs, right? So the scary, you may say a little bit scary atmosphere, you may say atmosphere from where loud voices always come, right? Such is the scenario of the school on daily basis. So on that day, nothing like this was heard. The school was silent, right? As he says, but now it was all so still. Like he felt that the school life has become still. It has stopped all of a sudden. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen, but of course that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning, right? So what he has tried to relate, try to understand, children, Sunday morning. On Sunday, no school opens on Sunday, right? So he's saying that it was as quiet, the atmosphere that day was not of course Sunday, right? So on that day, the school was as quiet as it is on Sunday morning, because it seemed to him that nobody is there in the school. So what he usually used to do, he used to enter the class in the commotion, because he was often late for the class. He used to enter the class in the commotion, in a disturbance, so that so that the teacher should not notice him entering late in the class. So what he says now, see, through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places, and M. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. He used to keep his ruler, the stick, right, under his arm. And the same atmosphere was there. He said that when he looked from the window, when he looked through the window, all his classmates were being seated on their benches. The teacher was walking with his iron ruler, right? Everything was same. Then he says, I had to open the door and go in before everybody, right? So what was the scenario now? He feels that now if he enters the classroom, he will be easily noticed by the class teacher, Mr. M. Hamel, right? You can imagine how I blushed and how frightened I was. Blushing means to feel shameful, right? To be ashamed of, when somebody enters late in the class, and that student is afraid of the class teacher, because the class teacher being very strict, you may say, right? So that person often blushes, and he or she is frightened at that time, frightened, full of fear, right? Blushing means to feel ashamed, right? So he was feeling ashamed because he was late to the class, and he was frightened as well, right? So now he is asking the readers to imagine that how blushing his face must be at that moment, and how afraid he was at that time, right? But nothing happened. Very, very surprising. He was expecting that Mr. M. Hamel would beat him with his ruler. He was expecting the beating or the scolding, right? Reprimanding from Mr. M. Hamel. But nothing happened. It means that teacher didn't say anything to Franz. See, Mr. M. Hamel saw me and said very kindly, go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you. It means the teacher asked him that he should occupy his seat as fast as he can, because they were already beginning with the lesson, right? Because he was late for the class. He felt very surprised that he has come so late, and the teacher has not said anything. Like, in fact, the teacher is talking to him politely in a kind voice, right? See, last paragraph. I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not till then, when I had got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. A very, very different line the writer has tried to construct, right? Alphonse Daudet here explains, by making Franz as his mouthpiece, he explains that as soon as Franz reached his seat, what Franz noticed? He noticed that the teacher was wearing different clothes, in fact, good clothes, beautiful green coat, frilled shirt, little black silk cap, all embroidered, means according to the fashion, right? That he never wore. It means the teacher used to wear Mr. M. Hamel used to wear that particular or these kind of dresses occasionally. Occasionally means if there was some function in the school or there was any inspection from the side of the board, right? So he used to wear special clothes on those special days only. But surprisingly, that day was neither any inspection day nor any prize distribution function. So friends begin to wonder why the teacher is wearing a different outfit or a much better outfit. See what he says next. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. So, the whole school, it seemed to him that the whole school, it means all the students of the school, right? They seem to behave in a strange manner, and solemn means deeply serious. When someone is gloomy, gloomy or depressed, very quiet, silent, right? So everything was strange. I mean, something was there. He could sense that something wrong has happened, right? He understands this. So, but the thing that surprised me most was to see on the back benches that were always empty, the village people sitting quietly like ourselves. Old Hauser is the name of a person, Hauser, with his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several other besides. See, a very, very peculiar thing, a very strange thing. What he says, he noticed that the last benches, back benches of the class were also occupied. And who was occupying those benches? The postmaster, former mayor of that place, and several other people, the old people, right? So many of them were there in the class. So it became a matter of like great surprise for friends that why those elderly people, why those old people are attending the class of Mr. M. Hamel, right? Everybody looked sad. Many different categories of people were sitting and they were all sad. And Hauser had brought an old primer thumbed at the edges, and he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages, right? What is primer? So he's saying that old Hauser was an old man, so he had brought an old primer. Students, primer is a kind of book that is prescribed for the primary section, primary classes, basic, right? So Hauser had also come to attend Mr. M. Hamel's class, and he had come with his old book, a primary book, right? And he was opening the book, and like he held it on his knees, and he had applied spectacles also, and he was reading across the pages. Now see the scenario. Like many of the people from that place were attending the class, even though they were not the students of that class. Still they were there in Mr. M. Hamel's class. Friends was wondering what has happened so different that they people are attending this class. So see, next line automatically it comes, while I was wondering about it all, means he was thinking about it all. Mr. M. Hamel mounted his chair, and in the same grave means serious, in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." A devastating statement for all the people present over there, except France. Could you understand what was said in this statement? Mr. M. Hamel gathered all of them and he addressed them as my children, right? My students. So he said that this would be the lesson he is going to deliver, would be the last lesson from his side, last lesson of France, right? Because I told you in the beginning that the country was defeated by Prussian people. So now German language would be taught in the regions of Alsace and Lorraine. Why? because Alsace and Lorraine, earlier these were the districts of France, but after Prussians had a victory over French people, so these two districts were taken under the territory of Prussia, right? So now, from that, after that day onwards, no French language would be taught in that these two districts. In fact, Mr. M. Hamel announced that that was his last day in the school. Right? Indirectly, he informed them that that was his last day in the school, and a new teacher would come from the next day, and that new teacher would teach them German. Right? So that was their last French lesson, and he requested, in fact, like a tone of request, he requested them to be very attentive while listening to the lesson. So, that was a thunderclap, these words were to me. Now see, Franz is saying that the words were thunderclap. Thunderclap, a loud burst, means something that is, very loud, something that actually opens one's eyes even if one is sleeping. So, that was a thunderclap, that was a big announcement, and for a while he became very happy in his mind, because he had never liked Mr. M. Hamel, and Mr. M. Hamel always used to scold him for one reason or the other. So that's why he became very happy, right? Oh, the wretches, that was what they had put up at the town hall. Now, France has understood that this must be the news that was displayed at that bulletin board. Remember that bulletin board which I told you? See, the image has also been shown that he is passing by that. And now he is remembering that this news must be there at that bulletin board of the town hall. Right? I hope that's clear to you. So, my last French lesson, why I hardly knew how to write. I hardly knew how to write. Now these are the lines said by Franz. Hardly means like actually he didn't know like how to write French. And he is wondering that this was the last French lesson, and he is realizing that he has never become serious while being in the class. Like he never listened to Mr. M. Hamel seriously. I should never learn anymore. It means he is wondering that he will no longer be taught French in this class. How would he be able to learn his own language? Right? I must stop there then. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons. Now he is repenting. All of a sudden, once he became happy that Mr. M. Hamel would be leaving the school, suddenly in the next minute, he is feeling sorry for himself. Feeling sorry, it means he is repenting, right? So he is having regret that he never paid attention to his French lessons. Now he is saying, for seeking birds' eggs or going sliding on the my books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints were old friends now that I couldn't give up. And Mr. M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. Cranky, often students call their professors cranky. It means a kind of upset fellow. And children are termed him Sar, S-A-A-R. Sar is the name of a river that is in France and Germany, that area. Right? So, what's he saying now? He's saying that like two kinds of thoughts were lingering on his mind. One was the thought of that happiness that Mr. M. Hamel would be leaving. Second thought was of a great fear. Fear of not paying attention, fear of becoming a very nonsense fellow, fear of not learning his language earlier, fear of not understanding the importance of his own language earlier, right? So now he is realizing that he should have paid attention to the lessons given by Mr. M. Hamel. Now he is feeling that his ruler and his cranky behavior, his strict behavior was justified. Now he is feeling that he is at fault. Friends, in his inward mind, he is, accepting every mistake that he has done. I hope that's also clear. Poor man, it was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, and now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. Now everything has become clear to Franz. Poor man, poor means helpless. Poor doesn't mean financially weak, right? So, excuse me, poor means the one that is helpless, right? The one for whom we feel pity. He's calling Mr. M. Hamel a poor man. Now he has understood that why he is wearing fine clothes, because it would be a sort of a farewell day. A farewell day, a day for saying goodbye in the school, right? So that's why he was wearing better clothes, his Sunday clothes, and that's why in his honor all the elderly people of the village had gathered there in his class. In the next line, he will explain why those people were sorry. I told you why Franz was feeling sorry. Franz was feeling sorry because he never paid attention towards Mr. M. Hamel's lectures, See next line. It was because they were sorry too. They were means all those people of village who were attending Mr. M. Hamel's class, they were also sorry. Why? That they had not gone to school more, because those people couldn't get much opportunities, much chances to attend school, right? So it was their way of thanking our master for his 40 long years of faithful service and of showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. A continuous feeling of non-belongingness to a place. Now they have begun to realize that in fact they don't belong to France anymore. Now they have been shifted to the territories of Prussia, right? So now all those people are realizing this, and they really wanted to pay an honor to Mr. M. Hamel, the teacher, right, who had faithfully served that school, who had done the job very faithfully for 40 long years. And trust me, 40 years is not a short span of time, right? So next paragraph. While I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. So in between that commotion, Franz was lost in the thoughts. He was not paying any attention towards the lessons, right? So all of a sudden he heard his name. And who might have called his name? Of course, Mr. M. Hamel. It was my turn to recite. Now, as the teacher often asks the children one by one, tell me the rule of this, tell me the rule of that, right? So now it was Franz's turn to tell the rules of participle. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle all through very loud and clear and without one mistake? So that is obviously the demand of every teacher, that if they have taught with honesty, utmost dedication, then their students should also respond to them without making mistakes in a clear and lucid manner, right? But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there. As I told you, Franz didn't know anything about participles, so he got confused while telling the first line, right? And stood there, holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. Daring, right? He didn't have courage to look up in the eyes of his teacher, Mr. M. Hamel, because he had not learned the lesson on participle. In fact, he had never paid attention towards the teachings of Mr. Hamel at any point of time, right? So now he was holding on to his desk. His heart was beating because he was afraid of his teacher, right? And he couldn't gather the courage to look into his eyes, right? In the next paragraph, he says, I heard M. Hamel say to me, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. Now, Mr. M. Hamel is saying that, Franz, don't feel bad means don't be afraid of me. The teacher is saying, don't be afraid of me. I won't scold you. I won't scold you means I won't rebuke you. I won't say anything harsh to you. Right? So you must feel bad enough. Now the teacher is saying that like you must have been shameful by this time. Means I won't scold you anymore. It means I won't use any harsh language on you now. Right? Since that was his last day, he was not in the mood to scold any child. But yes, he says that you must feel bad enough. He says that the children must be ashamed of themselves. Why? See how it is. Every day we have said to ourselves, bah, I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow. And now you see where we have come out. That's the trouble with Elsie's. She puts off learning till tomorrow, and now these fellows out there will have the right to say to you, how's it? You pretend to be Frenchmen, and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language. But you are not the worst, poor little friends. We all have a great deal to reproach ourselves with. You know, children, the teacher's statement is a sharp satire on the mentality of students today. What is the mentality of today's children? They often think that I learn this topic tomorrow. I have a lot of time, plenty of time. I have lots and lots of time, right? So we will do it tomorrow. There is no need to pay attention towards it. So this is their attitude that is often noticed. Now he says that like everything that was shifted to tomorrow, then again tomorrow, and then again tomorrow has finally come to an end. Now they don't have any tomorrow to learn French language. You know, French was their own language, their mother tongue, that was their linguistic identity. And they would never get another day for learning this language. Now, this was the worst situation for them. And see, he says, we have all a great deal to reproach ourselves with. Reproach again means to feel ashamed of, to feel disgraced, right? So all of them were feeling ashamed that like they never paid attention towards their teachers lessons, and now they are really feeling that it was their fault because they would never get those lessons again, right? Your parents, next paragraph, your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as to have a little more money. And I have been to blame also. So see how like different and how a little bit funny situation M. Hamel creates here. So M. Hamel says that like your parents were not anxious enough. It means the children in today's parents, in the parents of nursery class children, in the parents of LKG, UKG, first class children, you would notice a difference in the attitude, right? Difference in the attitude. Why? In the modern times, almost I would say almost all the parents are very much concerned about their ward studies. They are very much anxious about it. They feel tension if their ward doesn't work properly in the classes or like afterwards at home, right? So they want their children to study hard. So what was the time like they are talking of, that is 19th century, last 3 decades of 19th century. The time was like parents preferred their children to work on farm. Parents wanted their children to help them in farming, in doing their agricultural activities, or they wanted their children to do some part-time job at the mills or at other places. Like they were not focused on the thing that their children should study and become like good citizens or becoming more educated, right? So that's why M. Hamel is blaming the parents. He's saying that only the students are not to be blamed. Students should also be blamed, but their parents are also at fault because their parents never forced them to study. Their parents never motivated the children to study. Third, he is blaming, he is saying that I should also be blamed. He says, I have been to blame also. Why he is blaming himself? He says that Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? You know, he is exposing himself. He is telling his weaknesses very openly. M. Hamel says that, like, I should also be blamed for your, poor result, for your, poor education in French, because whenever I wanted to go out for fishing, whenever I wanted to go out for having fun, I used to give you an off day. Children are obviously happy when the teacher is absent in the class, right? So he sometimes he used to send children that go and look after my garden, go and water the plants and flowers, like nourish the flowers that are there in my garden. He is blaming himself. See, I personally felt that the writer has portrayed a beautiful character of M. Hamel, right? So he has blamed himself. Now, three categories he has blamed for the poor education of children. First, the children themselves, who never showed any interest in their studies. Second, their parents, who wanted their children to help them in their agricultural works or do some part-time job. And third, he is blaming the teachers as well, because the teachers often involve themselves in their own personal tasks, or the teachers often want to have more time for doing their, for fulfilling their own personal interests, instead of giving their 100% attention towards the student studies, right? I hope that's clear till now. Last paragraph of this page. Then, from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, right? So he began to praise the French language, he began to discuss one thing after another, things, talks of his stay there in the school, and he called the French language the most beautiful, he says, right? Most beautiful language of the world. See, this is the map of the France, right? Italy has been shown, Germany has been shown, but little this is a kind of blurred picture, and some of the area on the upper right side has been must have been occupied by the Prussian people, right? So see what he says: the clearest, the most logical. Now these are the things about French language, right? He says French language is the most beautiful language in the world. Why? Because it's very clear, it's very logical, that we must guard it. Guard means protect it. Guard it among us and never forget it. Then he says that they must protect it because it's their language. And children, how can a language be protected? A language can be protected when one continues the language in their speaking and writing. See, indirectly he is motivating the people of those districts that they should continue using French language even after the Prussian people begin to rule them, right? So he says, because when people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison, right? So see, how he has made a beautiful comparison. He says, because why they should not forget it, because when people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it means when somebody is put in prison, right? So if they don't cut themselves from the roots of their language, they always have the key of that prison house in which they are locked, right? It means those people, if they make an efficient use of their language, they can break those shackles, right? They can break those shackles of other countries' territories. They can free themselves. Simply, they can set themselves free, right? Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. He opened the book, M. Hamel, right? So, I was amazed to see how well I understood it. Amazed means to get surprised at. It means Franz was becoming happy. He was surprised at noticing that he understood the lesson very well. This is the same professor, Mr. M. Hamill. This is the same student, Franz. They were not having a good understanding among themselves till this date. As soon as Mr. M. Hamill announced that this was his last day in the school and French would no longer be taught in this school, suddenly he begins to pay much more attention to his class and begins to understand everything. See, all he said seemed so easy, so easy. Franz is saying that whatever Mr. M. Hamill taught in the class was so easy. It means Franz is calling himself a big fool. He's considering himself a foolish boy who never paid attention and who always used to blame his teacher. Right? So he says, I think too that I had never listened so carefully. See, the line which I just explained, that he never paid attention to the lessons and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. Now he is pointing out the shortcoming of the teacher, right? You know, children, just a general talk like what is the best thing a teacher can ever possess? So that the simple answer in one word is patience. Like patience is the biggest tool a teacher can exercise while dealing with any type of students, right? So he's saying that Mr. like he Franz himself never paid so much attention to his lessons, and Mr. M. Hamill was also never so like patient in dealing the students. He was also like he always used to be short tempered, right? It seemed almost that if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. At one stroke means in a single time. It seemed to friends that Mr. M. Hamill was applying his 100% efforts, even more than 100% efforts, in order to teach the children in the best possible manner. Like he was explaining so beautifully that friends felt that like he was giving his best lesson on that day, right? Next paragraph, after that grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamill had a new copies for us, new notebooks. He had brought new notebooks for the children, written in a beautiful round hand. Franz, Elsace, Franz, Elsace. See the feeling. Like how beautifully the writer has expressed that the professor is really going to miss the place, to miss these names in his career, right? They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the road at the top of our desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. Franz is describing that it seemed to him that the flags of his country were hanging everywhere on the top of their desks, and it all looked so beautiful, right? And everyone was set to work. Everyone was set to work means no student was making any disturbance, nobody was distracting the class. It was complete quiet, right? The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. You know, whenever we write something with force, whenever we write something with excitement, so a little bit sound comes. That is the sound of scratching of the only sound in the teachers often use the phrase there should be pin drop silence in the class, right? It means like the little bit sound which comes should be of like was of scratching of the pens on the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German? Even the pigeons? So, like, such a funny statement. What he's trying to say, that they were listening to various voices there, right? The voice of pigeons. So now Franz is, he's thinking that would those Prussian rulers make pigeons also learn German language? Because he was regretting of not paying attention to French lessons, and now he is afraid that they have to learn a totally different language, that is German. right? So German language would be taught in the school from the next day onwards. And now Franz is thinking that as their independence have been snatched by, the independence of French people has been snatched by Prussian rulers, now he is thinking that the birds living in our areas would also be snatched off their freedom, right? They would also like produce their sounds in German language. So just he is cracking a joke here, right? In the next paragraph of this page, whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair. It means without moving. When he looked up while he was writing on his page, he noticed that the teacher was sitting motionless and gazing first at one thing. Gazing means looking fixedly, right? Looking at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. It means friends noticed that Mr. M. Hamel was looking at each and everything with fixed eyes. Like first he was looking, suppose first he was looking at a bench, then he began to look at his lecture stand, his table, the walls, the ceiling, fans, everything, right? So he was looking at things in like by fixing his eyes in such a manner as he wanted to remember all those things, right? So as one sometimes we need to fix a memory of everything in our mind. So Franz here felt that the teacher is trying to remember, the teacher is trying to fix everything in his mind. Fancy, fancy here means imagine, right? Fancy, for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. It means now he is repeating that fact which we read on the previous page, that for 40 years Franz is asking the readers imagine that for 40 years he had been serving this school, that he has been a teacher in this school for the last 40 years, and with his garden outside the window and his class in front of the room. He was having a garden, the same garden in which he used to send his students that go and water my plants, go and take care of my flowers there in the garden, right? So he was noticing each and everything because that was his last day in the school. Now come to the last page. See what he says? Just like that. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, walnut dark brown color trees, a hardwood tree, right? So that were there in the garden, they had become taller because he had spent 40 years taking care of such things. And the hope vine that he had planted himself, right? Hope vine is a plant of vine, vine, plant of vine, and which Mr. M. Hamel had himself planted, twined about the windows to the roof. Twine means twisted, right? Something that is not straight. So about the windows to the roof. So how it must have broken his heart to leave it all. Poor man. See, like Franz is he is full of tears. Why? Because he is feeling sympathy for his teacher. The teacher who has given 40 precious years of his life to that school, he has to leave the place now, right? So Franz is thinking that Mr. M. Hamel's heart would be broken, right? So to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, those suitcases, etc. Mr. Hamel's sister was like packing their things because they have to leave the place, for they must leave the place, so they must leave the country next day, right? Next paragraph. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history. It means he was trying to give them the entire knowledge he had in himself, right? So then the babies chanted their ba be bo down at the back of the room. old Hauser, the same person who had come to attend the class, right? Old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands. Primer, I told you, that book of primary class. Spelled the letters with them, right? It means friends is signifying that all the people were learning something from the class. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, right? He himself was crying and his voice was trembling with emotion. It means with sentiments, with feelings. And it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Oh, how well I remember it, the last lesson. Now he's saying that was the best lesson, the last lesson, and he remembers it very well. Why? The day was such a kind, that day brought him such a kind of emotion in which he wanted to laugh as well and he wanted to cry as well. Right? So, all at once, the church clock struck 12. Struck 12 means it was the next day. Then the Angelus, at the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. Trumpets of the Prussians. See, children, trumpets of the Prussians here signify that Prussian people were celebrating their victory by blowing trumpets, by blowing musical instruments, and they were approaching that area in order to start their rule over there. Right? That next day had come. So, next is M. Hamel stood up very pale in his chair. Very pale signifies very weak, very helpless. I never saw him look so tall. It means friends had never seen him look so pale, so weak in appearance. My friends said I, but something choked him. He could not go on. Something choked him. Choked means something stopped him. Something disturbed him, obstructed him. It means he was unable to express. He wanted to say something. He started to say something. I, then space, then I, again space, but he couldn't speak anymore. Mr. M. Hamel, right? So then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could. Not in his normal handwriting. He wrote in very big words. What he wrote? Vive la France. Very beautiful. Vive la France is a French, utterance, and that means long live France. Vive la France means long live France. He is blessing the French people. He is blessing the people of France, right? He is blessing the French language. It means his heart is very heavy at this time. His heart is sinking in grief while saying he is blessing his country. He is asking for God's grace to bless the people of his country. Then he stopped and leaned his head. Leaned means to lean on, like not straight, right? So then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, like as we bow, bow. Leaning means bowing. We often say we bow our head in front of God, right? So he stopped and bowed his head against the wall, and without a word means without saying anything, he made a gesture to us with his hand. Gesture, he only made a symbol to them. School is dismissed, you may go. Sometimes like we don't say certain things, but we just so move our hands or wave our hands. So on that last day of his stay in the school, what did Mr. M. Hamel do? What did he do? He just waved his hand. He didn't say that children, it has become off now and you may go home. No. He just made a gesture. He just gave them a sign. Why? Children, because he couldn't speak anything. He was so filled with grief. School is dismissed. You may go. It means the school timing is over now and the students may return to their homes. Right? So I hope you have liked the lesson. Your queries are most welcome. Thank you. Have a nice day. Stay home. Stay safe.